socialpolitik och öffentliche Finanzen.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here this morning. I should start, I guess, with two apologies. First of all, this talk is going to be held in English. The reason is simple. My command of Swedish is non-existent. I already felt that it was a pity that I wasn't able to follow the talks that you've been listening to in all their detail. The kinds of things that I understood were highly interesting. The second issue is, well, on such a wonderful morning, getting together, discussing problems of old age provision. That's really a shame, but I'm not responsible for that, it's the organizers. And also, I mean, in at least some European countries, discussions about the future of pensions cannot wait, and that's a good reason to continue. Yeah, pensions in Europe, that's a fascinating theme, certainly for me, but I guess for many others in this room as well. Europe is very rich in examples about how things are today, how they should be, and also how they should not be. And therefore it's really interesting to look at this in all the varieties that we can observe. The reason is simple, it's a historical one. The modern welfare state originates from within Europe and then spread around to the world. All the varieties of pension schemes originate from within Europe, and you can see how they have developed over time. I mean, in applied pension theory, we distinguish three models. That's the Bismarckian insurance model, which was invented in Germany in 1889. The Beverigian scheme, the flat rate pensions, that was invented, if I'm correctly informed, in Denmark in 1891, so 2 years later. In the 1940s it moved to Britain, and the Scandinavians developed it into a two-layer Nordic model, which is something like the third type of models that we have to distinguish. Now, some of these historical differences, of course, have been blurred over time through reforms by which politicians often responded to very similar challenges. And at the same time, depending on how successful politicians have been in implementing reforms, probably the differences are now even bigger, even inside Europe. So my impression always is that European pension schemes today are like a large group of cousins from an extended family network. No one looks exactly like the other, but some share the nose, the ear, the chin, the color of the hair, the size, and all that. And that's mixed in various ways. Yeah, that was a few words about the past and present. Regarding the future, I really have to focus. So no detailed overview, just a small set of common tasks and problems, and I will mostly concentrate on funded pensions as a supplement to traditional public pensions. I guess this is of the highest interest in this audience. So three aspects essentially are what I'm going to highlight. Demographic aging creates problems for conventional public pay-as-you-go systems. Given the trends in demography, these kinds of schemes are no longer capable of providing adequate benefits. That's more or less the case in virtually all European countries. So some countries are hit much more than Sweden is, but I guess it's true everywhere. Funded pensions, they are not really superior, not fundamentally superior to pay-as-you-go schemes, but they are different in a way which is really useful. They are a necessary complement today, and in fact the only complement which is available. And then designing funded pension schemes, that's a subtle issue that requires attention to many details, the necessary degree of compulsion. How much room to give for individual choices, taking into account transaction costs that may arise, the degree of competition in financial markets that you can have, investment regulation, and last but not least, a very difficult issue that is very hard to organize, and that's trust in the scheme as it is. And I will deal with that, well, not in terms of rushing through a long series of tables and figures. It's very condensed information about 10, 28 or even more European countries. I have been guilty of doing that in a written form. For talk it's really boring, and even worse, this type of condensed information is not really telling, it's sometimes even misleading, because it still leaves out so many details that are important. So I will look at a very limited number of examples, just a few countries, narratives about, well, what I think is worst practice, poor practice, and then also good practice in Europe. Okay, first demographic aging and public pensions. To illustrate the consequences of aging in Europe, it can be relatively broad and look at a larger number of countries. What we need, and I hope this can be seen even from the back of the room, is just one very simple indicator for the demographic fundamentals of traditional pay-as-you-go public pension schemes. And that is the old age dependency ratio, the number of individuals aged 65 and over, per 100 individuals aged 15 to 64. And as you can see, there are some differences between the European countries. I captured in this figure already today, or this is looking back to 2000 when discussions started in most countries that led to recent reforms. And over time, things will develop in a different way, but in the long run, and that's 2060 here, these are projections prepared by Eurostat, not fully reliable for each individual country, but taking together all of the countries and therefore comparable. In the long run, you will have something like 3 groups of countries. Those where old age dependency goes up to about 40, those where it increases to about 50, and then there's also a non-negligible number of countries where it may reach or exceed 60 older people per 100 people of working age. And so that means old age dependency rises by factors roughly between 1.5, 2, or even 3 in some countries. Sweden has a problem, but compared to many other countries, this problem is relatively small. So this is in the range of an increase by 1.5. While in Germany it's more than 2, in Poland it's even a factor of 3. And so it doesn't really take complicated math to take away that to maintain current levels of public pension benefits, one would have to collect contribution rates that can become very high and, well, it's difficult to gauge that, but too high in many countries. Too high for national production to remain competitive internationally, or too high for, well, remaining net income of those who are active to be adequate, sufficient. And that means, well, we need pension reform. The basic problem is pay-as-you-go problems are by definition directly linked to domestic demographics and domestic labor market performance. And demographic aging may have adverse effects for both these fundamentals, and that means unfunded pension schemes have to be adjusted. Some of these adjustments certainly can be done within the public pension schemes. An important keyword being adjust the retirement age. Very hot issue in most countries that are discussing these things. I will not talk about that here. And then sooner or later, politicians will have to admit that benefit levels will be reduced to make sure that public pension schemes remain sustainable, and sometimes they even have to be adjusted to make them sustainable, as they no longer are. Sustainability is important to have safe pensions, so reducing benefits may be a requirement to well, contributing at least something to old age income in a reliable fashion, which in itself is important. But you inevitably have a conflict with the adequacy of old age income, the adequacy of benefits that unfunded schemes can deliver. Yeah? These adverse effects, they have to be countered by reforms, and then the conflict between sustainability and mainly adequacy. That's what leads us into the area of discussing funded pensions. Funded pensions as a necessary complement. When discussions about these issues started some 20 years ago, that's true for most European countries, there were experts stating that funded pensions are unambiguously superior because they promise a higher rate of return. And that means some of these experts even recommended a total conversion, a full transition. So closing down the existing unfunded pension schemes and having for a purely funded pension scheme for the future generation. This view is flawed. I'm not going into pension theory here, but it ignores transition costs, which typically eat up all the expected gains. So no full transition is required, it's not even possible. On the other hand, there were and still are experts who warn that funded pensions will not make a difference at all, at least in the limited case. Among other things, because financial markets might be affected by demographic aging as well. Or, to put things differently, pensions are about distributing future GDP between different groups, pensioners and active individuals. So if nothing happens to future GDP, the problem will remain the same, disregarding the way it is financed, the way this is organized on legal terms, etc. And this view is not correct either. Funded pensions, I said it, they are different. They are not automatically linked to domestic demographics. They are not automatically linked to domestic labor markets. If we expand them, this creates opportunities to shift a burden over time, even between generations. But probably some effort may be needed to make sure that this really happens. So you would have to look at what happens to aggregate saving. Yeah, I forgot to move on with the presentation. And none of these effects is really guaranteed. Yeah, you would have to look at whether there's really increase in aggregate savings, whether there is a change in investment, and that may be investment at home or abroad, and whether this contributes to higher GDP, or if you go international, to higher gross national product. And then, this is a promising strategy, but none of these effects is really guaranteed. So first, what I think is a kind of worst case scenario. I've recently been working on a transformation country. I'm not going to mention the name here because I found out that the observations I made in this country are, well, not fully, but a bit typical for a large number of transformation countries. What these countries did starting 20 or 10 years ago was typically the following. This is the traditional setup of an unfunded state-run public pension scheme. So you collect contributions from workers' salaries, put them into the pension scheme and pay out current pensions. And then what these countries did is they set up new, what they call private pension funds, to which younger workers could pay part of their contributions, or sometimes all of their contributions, to have a funded pension in 20, 30, 40 years' time. And up until that looks rather good, but the contributions that are currently paid to the public scheme, of course, are no longer fully covering the current pension benefits, and if there is no adjustment in pension benefits, or no higher burden on workers, then there will be a deficit here. And what governments in some of these countries then did is they take on this deficit, inject money from the public budget into the pension scheme and finance that through public debt. They issue government bonds and then somehow urge the managers of these pension funds to buy these government bonds as the main type of asset for what is called a funded pension scheme. Yeah, I'm not joking, that's true. This is a stylized description. I don't want to do any justice to countries who went in that direction. One would have to very critically check what happened to government debt, whether it remained within the early limits or whether it expanded. But actually, the scenario could be the following, The pension fund nourishes current pensions, and this is in fact a public debt. It's explicit public debt instead of the implicit public debt that was involved in the public pension scheme, but the difference is almost zero. So these kind of pensions, the future pensions here, they are not really safe, and whether they will be adequate, sustainable, that is an open issue. The lessons, and that's issues to deal with if you move in the direction of pre-funding pensions, is that transition costs must be openly allocated to someone. Either through higher contributions, plus savings for the young, or through lower consumption for the old, or a mixture of both. And a second important lesson is, well, look at the types of assets that are used to fund these so-called funded pension schemes. So accumulated reserves of funded schemes should be invested in real capital, in foreign assets, and certainly not in domestic government bonds, and certainly not with a share of 70, 80, or 100%. This is probably not only relevant for these transformation countries. I have my doubts as to whether demographic buffer funds which have been established in France, in Spain, following the model of the United States, the US Social Security Trust Fund, of course, whether they really conform to these first set of points that I have mentioned here as being important. So all strategies going for partially pre-funded, they ought to be set up in separate schemes, so no funding within the public pillar is my recommendation, and very important, investment decisions. They need adequate governance, they ought to be taken independently, decentrally, and not indirectly by the government or other actors of the quasi-public standing. Okay, there are further issues, so I have to go on. Designing funded pension schemes. That's a subtle issue, I said that in the beginning. Even if you, well, comply to these fundamental requirements, many further things can go wrong. And here, Germany offers an example of what I call poor performance. Poor in more than one respect. Since, so that's the old scheme once again, following up on Bismarck's invention, that changed over time of course. Since 2002, active members of the scheme are expected to save 4% of their current income in specific types of contracts which mostly belong, well, to private provision, third pillar. And this is meant to make up for reductions in benefit levels in the public scheme which were enacted in the same year and are now gradually becoming effective. So this is what they do, additional savings. In that sense, that's good news. But this is only voluntary, which is why I use the dotted line for this arrow. It's voluntary, but directly subsidized to make it more attractive, with considerable amounts of money. And before this reform, private provision was only a domain of a few self-employed individuals in Germany, so it's really started from zero coverage, and it has now reached about 1/3 of the target group. And in recent years, this increase has leveled off. So under the current framework, with voluntary decisions and subsidization, I don't think that this will expand much further. That's something, 33%, but it's not enough. So coverage is not sufficient. And another type of problem is you have very high fees in this sector, and partly as a result of that, rather low yields. I even suspect that creating this special market segment with certified products and then injecting subsidies has created opportunities for providers to take out the subsidies. So they don't really reach those who are supposed to receive them. But even if this is not true, I mean, this is private sector based on retail banking, private counseling, private marketing at an individual level, and this is a high-cost approach anyway. So much resources are wasted on first of all, on selling these contracts and then operating them. And that's probably also not an ideal platform for broad-based supplementary old age provision. So let's continue with the lessons. You need mandatory participation. One way or another, there are alternatives to full compulsion. I'll talk about that in a minute. Then transaction costs are very important. You need to organize an arrangement where transaction costs are low by their nature. While we may offer some individual choice, but one of the important lessons of behavioral finance research done in recent years is that individuals in this area, they don't really want too much choice. So in Germany, there are more than 1,000 products that could be bought in this second pillar or third pillar arrangement, and that's too much. You need a more limited number of standardized products, so selling them, organizing them would be cheaper then, and individuals would be happy. One condition, of course, then is that you still need a workable amount of competition between providers. So not just one provider, not just two or three, a few more, that would be very important. Okay, where are the good examples in Europe? I have to mention Sweden here, even though I did not include it in the graph. In fact, when German politicians discussed supplementary private provision in, well, about 2000, 2001, I wrote an article in the newspaper and said, look at Sweden. The premium pension is really a model for how to get things right. I won't go into details here. You are much more familiar with the system, probably not entirely up to date with how things have developed over time. And also you may know about a few shortcomings that I'm not aware of. Still, mandatory membership, source-based collection of premiums, the definition of a standard, a default structure of investment with some scope for choice who want to exercise it. These are important features of a comprehensive solution. More recently, I have advocated looking at another European country in order to find a strategy for how to get a fresh start for supplementary funded provision in Germany. And the other model I consider well designed and really promising is provided by the UK. This does not relate to the public pension scheme there. Yeah, it's really different from what many other European countries are running. And in the context of the recent reform, the British have now definitely abandoned their repeated attempts at establishing a two-layer, a Nordic-type pension scheme. Yeah, they are currently closing down the state second pension and use the funds to bolster up their old flat rate scheme to become the new state pension, which is, again, a pure basic pension. These are different traditions, not necessarily a model for everyone else. The instructive part is the framework for occupational pensions for all employees, which is now gradually established. So it's still in the phase-in, but the new workplace pension program is not based on compulsory membership. It combines auto-enrollment, so everyone is taken into the scheme unless he or she is absolutely sure he or she doesn't need it, and uses an opt-out clause, and this is repeated each 3 years. So you're not losing anybody who is uncertain about what to do. And that's a very good framing of individual decisions in that area. Also, employers have to co-sponsor it. This is certainly controversial, would be controversial when discussed in other countries. But they also play a role in selecting suitable plans, negotiating the conditions for the plans, while funds are operated decentrally by competing providers. And for those employees whose employers do not offer a particular solution, there is a default plan called National Employment Savings Trust, NEST. And again, this is a very comprehensive solution which I think is suited to warrant sufficient coverage. Yeah, you have these additional payments. It's, well, as far as it can be, a low-cost scenario which has been invented here, and even typical gaps in coverage are being taken care of. Okay, so yeah, auto-enrollment is important, and then decentral decisions about investment, default solutions, an active role of employers, as I said, that might be controversial. So meaningful default solutions are important, competition in financial markets is important, and finally, trust. In those countries where good solutions are missing, discussing expansions of supplementary funded pensions is currently difficult. This is certainly the case in Germany, but I guess things are similar elsewhere. And the main reason is that the recent financial crisis has undermined trust in financial markets, in financial intermediaries, and it has also led to a long-lasting low yield period. Occasionally I talk to fund managers in Germany, I sometimes cooperate with them, and someone very recently told me that he's still able to earn a nominal return of 5% on pension savings that he administers. That sounds acceptable, but of course it requires sufficient freedom of investment. So if you have to invest in AAA rated government bonds, this will be impossible today. You need shares, you need corporate bonds, etc. A matter of regulation. What's probably more intriguing is this lack of trust in funded arrangements. Strengthening public pay-as-you-go schemes, which is what some actors in Germany are now demanding, this is not the way forward. Simply not an option in many countries, certainly not in Germany. We've been talking about demographic aging and what it does to the demographic fundamentals. So how can we reach support for a renewed strategy of expanding supplementary old age provisions? At least in many European countries, politicians alone, the laws that they make, the rules that they devise, might not be able to overcome the problem of the lack of trust. And this is why I think the UK example is so important. Linking supplementary pensions to the employment relationship with some degree of co-determination, maybe even collective negotiations. In Germany we have, for several sectors of industry, we have collective agreements about occupational pensions, and this could be spread around to, well, virtually the entire economy. And probably it's a vehicle elsewhere. So linking old age provision, supplementary old age provision to the employment relationship, bringing in employers as another actor, who is relatively neutral, has no own stake in making profits in financial markets, is not politicized as much as politicians are. So this could be a vehicle, a very promising vehicle for obtaining large coverage at moderate costs. Okay, many issues that should be added here will be covered by subsequent talks. So what other regulations needed, taxation of funded pensions, that's very important. I'll be silent on that. Let me just sum up what I said. Sustainable, adequate and safe pensions in Europe, a framework for that, this is still under construction. Some countries made important steps in the right direction, others didn't, or made even steps in the wrong direction. We have different traditions, different situations, I mentioned that in the beginning, so there's not one size fits all, no uniform solution for everyone, and the ideas that I spread around, I threw out, maybe important in some places, in others not. There is certainly a set of common problems which call for similar discussions, similar solutions, so demographics are similar, financial markets, they are integrated, and they work much the same way in most countries. And then, as I said, there are a few promising examples already today, and Sweden, let me mention that again, is definitely among that. From my side, that was what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
And there is a short time for some Q&As. If there are any comments from you, please go ahead. I will bring the microphone. Please present.
Britta Leroy, Nordea. Do you see any correlation between funded pension systems and the expected period we have of low rate environment?
You mean that the amount of assets that have to be somewhere might contribute to this low yield environment? That's a very subtle issue.
They have more liquidity now to fund those systems and thereby prolong the period of low growth and low interest rates.
I mean, I'm mainly an expert on social policy, pensions, not on financial markets and monetary policy, but I feel it's strange that the interest rate policy of the European Central Bank has such a strong impact. There should be actors in the financial market who are not interested in the short end, and we could have a regular spread of interest rates over the duration, etc. And this is not the case, so there must be more fundamental reasons, and this might be one of them, of course, which then means investment has to be diversified even through a broader set of countries, not just within the small European market.
Okay, Peter Dahlgren from SEB. You assume that this retail advisory model has transaction cost, which is quite expensive, and you said that because it's costly to give advice and so on. But in the digitalized world, that could be incorrect. You could argue that incorrect because the marginal cost of an advice could be zero almost if you have a digitalized version of that. How do you see that? If that were the case, how do you see that affecting your reasoning?
I'm not aware of the situation in all European countries. I know that in Germany, retail banks, insurance companies are working on digitalized, standardized solutions for their own company for more than 10 years, certainly for 20 years. And still, what we observe is a very fragmented market where costs are still rather high. So it sounds like a promising approach. The question is how fast it can bring the progress required, and whether, the number of products, the type of products, the information which is publicly available, that's a constant issue in Germany, and I know it's been true in other countries as well, how to, standardize information that can be easily compared between different products. And I said there are more than 1,000 products in Germany, If you'd have fully standardized information, you'd still need some time or computer program which picks out the best ones. This may be underway, but thus far the progress is modest.
Yeah, and you know, I'm talking, of course, bragging about the Swedish banking system, sitting here with Nordea and SEB would maybe not be good to do. But the thing is that the digitalization has become, you know, much more further in this country than in maybe Central Europe when it comes to banking digitalization. And I guess we're just now seeing the revolution of this in these banks. I know that my colleague here, they are investing enormous amount of money to do this, and we do so. And we are competing on this, and actually this is really a breakthrough, and the computer power is there now to do it, to do the robotic advisory. And so I think that assumption should be challenged.
Okay, then, well, basically it would be welcome to see progress in that area.
One final question is what Christina mentioned just briefly, the effect of immigration and the refugee situation in Europe. Some of them very low skill, and it's very different from different countries. It's definitely the same in Germany as in Sweden, but not in Poland, not in Estonia, and so on. How will this affect the pension systems in general? Have you any idea?
Thus far, I refrain from coming up with hard conclusions. I continuously publish long-term projections for the German public pension scheme, how it might financially develop. We don't even know how many additional immigrants we received last year. We still have preliminary figures, and we don't know anything about who they are, how long they are going to stay, about their qualifications. What we know about their qualifications does not sound very promising. And so we're still sorting out these kinds of things, but most importantly, it's a kind of a shockwave which we cannot expect to continue. And then it does not really make a difference for our demographic prospects. Yeah, it might lower old age dependency for like 10 to 20 years and then even increase it, but by a very small scale compared to the columns I've been trying to show you. So immigration of qualified individuals, hundreds of thousands year by year, that would help, but I don't think there are source countries for that.
Not very promising, that doesn't sound very confident.
No, I mean, immigration contributes to the solution, but it's not the solution, impossible.
You will stay for lunch, I hope, so then there will be more.